And I'm back. Hi everyone. I'm sorry for having to miss last week's video. It turns out that taking care of a newborn really is a full-time job for two people, which is what our son's pediatrician told us at his first appointment. There seems to just be a never-ending cycle of things to do. So yeah, I couldn't quite fit in last week's video. It was pretty soon after the delivery. Everything was still pretty fresh. So thanks for your patience with this one. And I'm really excited to be here today to tell you about my induction and labor and delivery experience. Hopefully it'll be interesting for you, and maybe those of you who are thinking about having kids or who are pregnant will learn something new about the whole process. I had a really great experience. I'm so grateful for that. Our son, who was born on May 5th, is happy and healthy, and of course we're so grateful for that as well. So I'm excited to share this with you today, and I hope you enjoy it. Before I begin, I'll start with our deep breath. Maybe try to get outside today. Honestly, just getting outside for a little bit of time on my own this morning has just boosted my spirits so much, and just the summer smells and everything, it's amazing what it can do for you. So maybe try to get outside for your deep breath today too. Okay, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. All right, let's get started. I'm just hopping in here because I thought it would be helpful to provide some context for my plans and expectations heading into delivery before I share my real experience with you, so that you can get a sense of how different my plan was compared to what actually ended up happening. So I'm going to read my birth plan here now. A few months before my due date, my husband and I completed this birth plan template together, which was provided to us by the hospital that I would be delivering at. And the idea was that it would encourage us to go over the options together and think about things ahead of time. And then it would be put in my chart so that the medical team would be aware of my plans and preferences when I went in to deliver. I also thought it might be interesting for some of you to get a sense of the different decisions and information a birth plan consists of. So here we go. So the first section is just a general getting to know me section. So here we filled out the due date, the expected sex of the baby, our plan for the baby's name, which is Connor Willem Torres. And you may or may not have noticed he's actually right behind me here, being his perfect self. The doctor who cared for me during the pregnancy, the people who I want to be with me during labor and during the birth. So this was still pretty limited at the hospital that I delivered at due to the pandemic. So I actually could only specify one person. So I specified my husband, of course. And then I got to outline how this person will support me. So I wrote by driving me to the hospital, holding my hand and cheering me on. And my husband did a phenomenal job at all 3 of those things. So I'm very grateful. And then if I have a cesarean birth, I also specified that my husband would be the one to accompany me into the operating room. The next section is pain management preferences. So there were 4 options for this one. There's, I want a medication-free birth. I want a medication-free birth if my labor goes well, but I will consider pain medications if things do not go as expected. I want medication, but I would like to go as long as possible without it. And I want medication as soon as possible. So going into it, I had checked off, I want medication, but I would like to go as long as possible without it. The next section is options I hope to use in labor include. So I'll read the things that I checked off. So I checked off hot, cold compresses, a birthing ball / labor stool, different positions like side lying, walking, listening to my own music, which, by the way, thank you to all of you who sent in labor playlist recommendations for me through Instagram. I really appreciated those. Pillows, Nitronox or laughing gas, breathing and relaxation. And then under other options, I also added pictures, just like motivational family pictures that made me smile. So the options that I did not choose ahead of time were a tub bath or shower. As much as I would have loved a nice bath during labor, I just felt like I didn't really feel comfortable in the hospital bath and shower and in that environment. So I didn't think I would want that. I also did not check off epidural, but I did include a little asterisk with a note. And I said, if needed, I will do it, but hopefully not, since I don't think I could tolerate it. And that kind of stems back to my fear of needles, and especially the idea of a needle going into my spine area and me not being able to see it. And that just, the whole idea of that really, really freaked me out ahead of time. So my plan was definitely not to get that. And then I also didn't check off use of the squatting bar. So that section kind of gives you a sense of what I thought my labor was going to look like. I thought it would be quite active with walking, the breathing and relaxation, the birthing ball, different positions. Yeah, that's what I was hoping for going into it. Okay, and the next section is other things I would like you to know about me or us, such as important issues, fears, concerns, previous experiences. So I wrote ++ anxious about IV/needles/epidural, and I like encouragement. And then it says after the baby is born, I would like to have skin to skin care for at least 1 hour after birth. So I definitely checked that off. I'm a huge proponent of skin to skin, and we got to do that right away. And that was such a special moment. And then I got to specify who would hold the baby skin to skin if I'm not able to do it, who would cut the cord, who would take pictures and video, who would put on the first diaper. And so, of course, I named my husband for all those things. And he was able to do all those things, which is great. And then you got the option of whether you would like delayed cord clamping. So we did some research into that and decided we did want that. Other things that are important to me in the care of my baby. So I specified support when learning how to breastfeed, since I really wanted to give breastfeeding a good shot. And I have obviously never done it before. So that was one area that looking back, I was kind of surprised that there wasn't a little more active support on the part of the medical team, especially knowing that the hospital I delivered at is known to be kind of a big pusher of breastfeeding. I don't know if it just happened to be the people that were working with me, or if it was just how busy it was that day, because it did seem like everyone was really busy, which is kind of always the case in the hospital these days. And I completely understand that as someone who's worked in the hospital. But I really found like I had to advocate for myself to initiate the breastfeeding as soon as possible and to ask for help, as opposed to the team kind of encouraging me and, reminding me to do it every 2 to 3 hours and things like that, which was fine because I was very motivated to do that. So it wasn't a big deal. It was just something that surprised me. Then I had to specify the pediatrician who will care for Connor, who's making some noise now, and my plan for feeding. So I checked off breastfeeding. And then during my stay in the mother-baby unit, you got to specify who would stay with you. So of course, my husband, who would be present for any tests or exams. And so again, my husband. And then the following people will be helping me at home. So I specified my husband, my mother-in-law, and my mom, who I'm very grateful came and stayed with us for a few days when we first got back from the hospital. And that was a huge help. Very happy I had her. And then we all signed off on it, my doctor, my husband and I, and then that was put in my chart, since the medical team you get when you go to the hospital is not necessarily the team you've been working with throughout the pregnancy, because it just depends what time you show up, what time the baby comes, who's on shift at that time. So that was in my chart so that anyone working with me could review it and get a quick snapshot of like how I was thinking things would go and who I am. So again, I'm just sharing this so that you can keep it in mind as you now listen to me recap my real experiences and the decisions I ended up making. Enjoy. Okay, so I definitely still have some of that postpartum brain fog. So I have a little list here of kind of the key points and timeline of things that happened during my induction, labor and delivery process. Some of which I remembered, some of which are collected from my husband's memory, because it really happened fast and parts of it really were a blur to me. So yeah, I'll take you through it and hope you enjoy. As I mentioned in one of my previous videos, my induction was scheduled for Wednesday evening, so May 4th at 5 p.m. And we kind of headed into that with the mindset that we would be showing up at the hospital, the induction would be started, and then I'd be staying there overnight with the plan to deliver on Thursday, May 5th, the next day. So just kind of the lead up to that, we really wanted to, make the most of the last night and kind of day we had together, my husband and I, because it's been just an incredibly busy stretch the past pretty much like 4 to 5 months for us. So the night before, so Tuesday night, we drove to the airport and we just sat and watched the planes land and take off, and that was so special. I love watching planes, and it was just such a calm, peaceful moment before everything's going down. Then the day of the induction, Wednesday, I actually had a different unrelated appointment downtown a bit earlier in the afternoon. So we had everything packed up and we headed downtown early. I went to that appointment and then we had some extra time. So we had a nice little coffee date, got caffeinated before the big night. We kind of just reflected together on the whole pregnancy, which was a crazy experience in and of itself, as I've kind of shared, and was super, super hard in a lot of ways. So we just reflected on that, everything we've been through. We walked around one of the areas we went to as part of our wedding, so that was really nice. We stumbled upon a nice little restaurant that we decided would be our first mom and dad date night restaurant, when we get a babysitter and feel comfortable leaving our son at home. So yeah, it was just a really nice, calm lead up to going to the hospital, and I definitely recommend doing that with your partner, making some time for that, because it really is such a pivotal time in your family, and that was really special, and I'm really glad that we did that. So then it was finally time to head over to the hospital. So we made our way there. We checked in, registered at the nursing triage. They had my name on their list, so they knew I was coming. The nurse brought us into our own little room and hooked me up to the monitor. I'll include a picture of that here. And said that the plan was to monitor the baby for 20 minutes, just so she had a baseline of where everything was at right now. And then the OB resident would come in to assess if I had dilated any more at all, and kind of what the plan was going to be for the induction. So I was on the monitor for 20 minutes. The baby's heart rate was pretty low, which had kind of been the case my last few OB appointments. So definitely lower than usual, but the nurse said she wasn't too concerned. She described him as just a chill guy, which has held true so far since he's been out of the womb as well. He must get it from his mom. I don't know. Anyway, so the nurse she wasn't too concerned. She just said she'd make a note of it and everything. The monitor was also measuring any contractions, and there were some little spikes, but I couldn't feel them yet. So they were more just like, I guess, little cramps at that point. The baby's movement was also less than the nurse expected. So she had me drink a ginger ale during that to try to get him moving a little more, and that helped. So there weren't really any concerns there. Got off the monitor, and then she called the OB resident. Apparently they were in between shifts, so we had to wait quite a while in that little room. And I remember it was very cold. My husband was very cold waiting beside me. But anyway, the resident came, introduced herself, did the vaginal exam. I was still not dilated at all. So she said we would proceed with putting the Foley catheter in, which I talked about a couple weeks ago in my last video, as a form of induction. Basically, her and the nurse inserted that, which was quite uncomfortable, but not painful. And then they pump it up to kind of open up the balloon to stretch the cervix open. And then the nurse taped kind of the hanging part on the inside of my thigh so that it was pulling to kind of encourage the balloon part to open up my cervix and gradually pull down. I was just uncomfortable getting it in, and like right from the second that it was in, it was just uncomfortable to walk. I made the mistake of wearing leggings there, which did not leave any room for the little part that comes down. So thankfully I had an extra pair of sweats in my bag, so I was able to change into that. But that brings me to my next point. So after they inserted the catheter, they had to monitor the baby for another 20 minutes to make sure he was responding okay to all of that, since the balloon sits right next to the baby's head. While they were monitoring all of that, the nurse explained that the hospital was full to the rafters that night, so I wasn't going to be able to have a bed there that night. The plan was going to be to send me home with the catheter and instructions of what to do if all these things happen, which I can include a picture of that here as well, and then to call back in the morning if I didn't need to call during the night, to let them know what the progress was and to ask what the plan was going to be in terms of coming back for either the next step of induction or if that was going to be enough. Yeah, that was like a big shift, because our mindset was kind of that we were probably going to be there for good, and that the next time we were going to come home was with the baby. So that was kind of annoying. Everyone told me you just have to go with the flow with this, so we just accepted it and adapted. So I got dressed, went to the bathroom for the first time with the catheter before we left, which was not a big deal. All these firsts are just kind of nerve-wracking when it's your body, but that was fine. Yeah, then we headed home. We didn't have any like dinner plan or anything because we thought we would most likely be in the hospital. So we grabbed takeout dinner from our favorite restaurant on the way home, which was another last treat together. When I was sitting in the car and my husband was going in to pick up the dinner, like I started having some pretty uncomfortable cramps, but they told me that the cramping would be pretty normal after the Foley goes in, so just figured it was cramping and I'd have to get through it. And then when we got home and were eating dinner, I was really uncomfortable. It was not an enjoyable dinner. I think I was kind of just mentally tired too. Yeah, I just remember being so uncomfortable during dinner. We were watching a show. I couldn't even really focus on it. I was just trying to eat and ignore the cramping. It was kind of just like bad period cramps, I guess, like very low. So I didn't think it was contractions because it wasn't like my whole stomach was contracting or anything like that. I figured it was just the discomfort from the catheter. So we went to bed. I dozed off for about 2 hours and then woke up around midnight again, and just so much discomfort from the cramping. And it seemed to come kind of at regular intervals. So then I started thinking maybe these are contractions. Like I didn't know, since this is my first, like I didn't know what to expect. So I started using the Contraction Timer app in bed, try to start tracking to see if like maybe I was actually in labor. Meanwhile, my husband was sleeping, and yeah, I was so uncomfortable. That's the only way I can put it. So I started using the app and like tracking the cramping, and it was definitely cyclical, and it was like ranging between 5 to 10 minutes apart. Around 1, the app told me that it was time to go to the hospital because the contractions were kind of consistently about 5 minutes apart. But I kind of questioned that because I was like, I don't think I'm in full labor and need to go to the hospital yet. Like the Foley hasn't fallen out. Yeah, so I just wasn't really sure, and I didn't want to be that person that calls and it's nothing. This is just like the beginning of the pain. So anyway, so then I got out of bed and went to the couch, tried to sleep there for a bit. I kind of dozed off. The cramping / contractions eased for a little bit slightly, but then I woke up around 2:30 and they were again like pretty bad. I couldn't find a comfortable position. I went back to the bed and continued tracking on the app, and it kept telling me to go to the hospital. Around 3:15, I went to the bathroom and noticed that I lost some of my mucus plug. So at that point, because the contractions / cramping, I still wasn't sure what it was at this point because they were so strong and I was so uncomfortable. And the app was telling me to go to the hospital. I had lost some of my mucus plug. I ended up calling the nursing line that they gave me and explaining where I was at and asking what I should do. And the nurse said that this was all part of the normal response to getting the Foley put in. She said these were all good signs and that I don't have to come in yet, keep monitoring everything, and then call back at 8 in the morning unless something else progresses. So I kind of just laid in bed, tried to sleep, did not sleep at all until around 5:45 when I went to the bathroom and the Foley fell out along with the rest of the mucus plug, which was really large and gross. But it actually, honestly, it did feel good when the Foley came out because it was just so uncomfortable. That was encouraging because I knew at that point I was dilated to 3 centimeters because the Foley balloon is 3 centimeters. At that point, I was just concerned because my water, there was no gush of water. And for me, it was really important to monitor when my water broke because I tested GBS positive, which is a bacteria that can be harmful to the baby. So if there's any leaking or when the water breaks, you have to go to the hospital right away to make sure you get penicillin as an antibiotic to protect the baby. So I was nervous because I couldn't really tell if my water had broken, even though my mucus plug had came out. So I wasn't quite sure what to do. But again, I was hesitant to call because I didn't want to be annoying and I didn't know what to expect. So it was tricky. So yeah, I'll spare you the picture of the Foley on the bathroom floor. It was disgusting. And I just remember being on my hands and knees trying to clean the bath mat and the floor and having these cramps. And I was like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? Anyway, so then I told my husband, hopped in the shower, clean myself off. Because I was so worried about whether or not my water had broke, I ended up calling again at that point. It was probably around 6:30. I told the nurse that the Foley had fallen out. I had lost my mucus plug. I was concerned because I didn't know if the water had broken, and I'm GBS positive. So she said to try using a few pads and see if they're soaking through consistently. In that case, my water has likely broken. To monitor the baby movements, if there's any concerns that the baby isn't moving, to call again, and just to keep track of my contractions and pain level, and if it's getting kind of closer together and like unmanageably strong, then to call again. She said otherwise, call back in an hour and a half at 8 o'clock when the team leader is there, and then she would let me know what time that there would be a bed for me that day, because I would need to go in that day. I tried the pads. They were all like a little wet but not completely soaked through, so it was just so hard for me to tell if my water had broken, especially as a first timer. I didn't know if it was slowly leaking, and that was my amniotic fluid, so it was really hard to know what to do, especially when you're in pain. I was already so tired from that night. 6:30 to 8, had breakfast, packed all our bags, got ourselves organized. I was just consistently having those really strong period cramps, which were contractions at that point. So I would do a little bit, then when it would come, I would just have to hunch over, and yeah, it was really uncomfortable. And then at 8, I called, had to be put on hold for quite a long time before the team lead was available, which is someone who worked at that hospital specifically and just in hospitals in general. I know how busy it is, so it was fine, but as someone who was in pain, still nervous that I should have gone in sooner because of the water breaking GBS positive bacteria situation. It was stressful. I was in pain, waiting on hold. It was like 10 to 15 minutes, I think. Then finally the TL came on, and she's like, okay, come in at 10. We'll have your room ready for you then. I expressed to her how concerned I was about the water breaking and how I wasn't quite sure if it had, and how much pain I was in, because it seemed like a lot of pain to me, but at the same time, I didn't know how bad this pain was gonna get. So then the TL said, okay, you can come in now. We'll have the bed ready for you. So we got in the car, we drove there. That was quite an uncomfortable drive. I mean, like I'm really glad I brought an ice pack to put across my lower abdomen, and that did really help for me. But all the bumps in the road driving across downtown Toronto, it was so painful. The whole time I was still tracking the contractions on the app, and the app kept telling me, you need to go to the hospital, you need to go to the hospital. And I just kept thinking, we're on our way, we're almost there. The contractions were about 3 to 4 minutes apart at that point, lasting like 45 seconds to a minute, sometimes a little over a minute. And they were quite intense. I was not in a good place driving there. And then we got to the parking lot. When we were driving in, I told my husband, like, you need to park in the very first spot we see, and we need to go in, because I can't tolerate looking for the best spot or anything right now. So we did that. Walking in, I was crying. We had to stop. It's a fairly short walk from the parking garage to the hospital door, but we had to stop a couple times. I'm sure people in that area see people in labor going in all the time, because this hospital has a large labor delivery unit. So I'm sure no one thought anything of it, but I was just crying. So many people around. We checked in quickly at the first entrance, and then we went up. We had to go through the whole kind of registration process again that we had gone through the night before, and there was a lineup. I was in so much pain. I was crying. The other pregnant woman ahead of us in line looked very comfortable to me, and I was like, either we came way too late or I am the biggest wimp ever. I couldn't even talk to the registration guy. My husband had to sign off on the registration papers for me. It was all a bit of a blur. I was in so much pain. Then we went to the next nursing triage, gave my name. They knew that I was going to be coming. She sat me down. She paged the nurse right away. I remember her saying, you know, Brittany Torres is here. She's very uncomfortable. I think you should come now to bring her to the room. The nurse came. She was lovely. Honestly, the medical team, the nursing team that helped me out through the whole process, they were all absolutely amazing, and I am so grateful. I cannot emphasize that enough, because it really made all the difference. They're amazing people, so patient with me. Anyway, we'll get to that. So she took my husband and I into the labor and delivery room number 5. She introduced herself, got me hooked up on the monitor to check how the baby was doing, and the contractions, and what the timing and everything was for them. Then she told me that they would have to get the IV in me soon, and I told her how bad I am with needles and how I was not looking forward to the IV. She asked me if I planned to get an epidural, because I was clearly in a lot of pain already. And I told her it wasn't part of my plan to be getting an epidural, and because I was so bad with needles, I didn't even think I could tolerate that or sit still for that. So she said, you know, it's up to you, I'll support you in whatever decision you want. But I could tell she was thinking I would probably fare better if I got the epidural. I just kept thinking, like, am I just a huge wimp because I am not handling this pain well? So I ended up saying, you know, like, I'll think about the epidural. Maybe if the doctor comes and checks how dilated I am and I can see like how close I am to the end of this, that would kind of help inform my decision. So she said that was fair. She came back to get the IV ready, and then she noticed that I had pretty small veins, and because I was so anxious, so worked up, in so much pain, and I had told her I was worried about the IV in the first place, she said she was going to get the anesthesiologist to come and do the IV for me because she didn't want to risk having multiple tries and being a bad experience because I was already in rough shape. So she brought the anesthesiologist resident in, who was very nice. Her first attempt at the IV failed in my hand. It was very painful. It wasn't good. My husband just kept telling me just to look at him in the eyes, and I was having a hard time doing that. I kept just trying to like zone out and look at the ceiling, and he kept trying to just get me to focus on him, which was very helpful. The second attempt, she got it in, but yeah, that was just not fun at all when I was having the contractions on top of it. But they got it in. Then the anesthesiology resident explained the epidural to me, just in case I was going to choose to get it. She went through the process of how it works, the risks and benefits, which I already knew all of this from the prenatal course we did and just from considering ahead of time whether or not I wanted it. But it was very helpful that she took the time to do all that. So I told her I still wanted to wait to see how dilated I was because I thought if I was close to the end I might not need it, and I was hoping that I wouldn't need it. I asked the nurse what the options were for getting pain medication through the IV since that was already in, and she said they don't typically do that, which I was kind of surprised because in my prenatal course they said that that was one of the options, so I kind of had that in my head. I also asked her about the nitro mask because I was just kind of going through the options I remembered that didn't involve the epidural, and she said that was an option, but they normally saved it till later, closer to the pushing point and when you're going to deliver. So the medical team came in. Initially they didn't do the vaginal exam because I was in a lot of pain. They weren't sure how I would tolerate it at that point. I was kind of worked up. That might have been an understatement. Anyway, they said, you know, based on what they were seeing, they thought that I would be delivering like later in the day, late afternoon, maybe evening. So they weren't even too rushed about getting the penicillin in me through the IV for the GBS. They told the nurse it wasn't a huge rush because they thought we still had a good amount of time. For the penicillin, I think it has to be going for 4 hours before the baby is born. Yeah, they thought I was at least more than 4 hours away. Then they left. Then my pain was just really escalating a lot. I was not tolerating it well. I was trying to do the deep breathing that I had planned to do, but that I just wasn't even able to do that. And I remembered one of the YouTube videos I had watched about preparing for labor and delivery had recommended using like low vowel sounds like O and U when you're breathing out during contractions. So I tried that. I started making like loud, like ooh sounds, which apparently was pretty funny. But I did not care what anyone was thinking or saying about me at this point. Like I was just in so much pain with these contractions. So started doing that, was making a lot of noise. Probably everyone in the hallway could hear me. Then my nurse was seeing that I just wasn't doing great. She called the team back in, so they did a full vaginal exam. So the first time they did it, they said I was about 5 to 6 centimeters. They were pretty sure my water had broken. So because they had said 5 to 6 centimeters, which in my mind was, you know, like about halfway, and because I was in so much pain, I was like, okay, let's do the epidural. So they got the anesthesiologist to come in, who was phenomenal, super nice. I described to him like how, I mean, I'm sure he could see how anxious I was, but how anxious I was about the epidural specifically. They sat me up on the side of the bed, had me cross my legs, if I remember right. My husband was in front of me. It was really hard because my contractions were coming really quickly at this point and were so painful. Like to me, it was 10 out of 10 pain or higher. I was really just ready for this epidural at this point. I was giving up with trying to put up with the pain on my own. And so he had me kind of hunch forward and hold my husband's hands. He said it was really important to not be kind of leaning to the side and to keep my back rounded and open for him to insert the epidural.
In my head, I just kept saying, like, it's going to be better after this. Just hold still for a little bit. You can do it. But it was really hard. And every time one of those contractions came, I had to tell him, and he would kind of ease off on what he was doing. The epidural itself, it felt really weird. I mean, like, I definitely felt it go in, and like it was painful to me. He asked me if it was just pressure, if it was pain. In my head, it was pain, and it kind of felt like tingling, like electricity kind of thing. I just kept telling myself that it was almost done. My husband was just amazing. I would not have been able to do it without him. When it was done, he told me it would take about 15 minutes to, fully take effect. After the epidural was inserted, I was just super, super worked up. I feel like a broken record. But yeah, I was just anxious and worked up through this entire process. But especially after the epidural was put in, they laid me down. The pain was still so bad because the epidural obviously hadn't taken effect at all yet. Then my blood pressure was super low at that point, and they were having a lot of trouble finding the baby's heart rate. And they were getting like really extremely low values, and they weren't sure if it was accurate, and they were getting concerned about that. The nurse called the medical team in because I was just not looking good. A bunch of people came in. They had me trying a bunch of different positions. I was just like that low vowel sound. I was just doing that over and over in pain. That was probably like the lowest point of everything. My husband told me at one point, I said I just wanted to die, which is very extreme, and I'm not proud of myself for saying that, but yeah, that just shows how much pain I was in. They tried a bunch of different positions. I remember them saying, like, the baby's not liking this position, Brittany. We really have to move you to make sure the baby's okay. And so I was nervous about the baby. I was in so much pain. I kept saying, like, I can't do this. This is the worst thing. And it was so hard. While they were encouraging me to change positions, because of how anxious I was, they gave me this nitro spray under my tongue. I'm not quite sure if that did anything, but in my mind, I was like, yes, give me anything that's going to calm me down. So that was one other thing they gave me. And then they kept telling me the epidural is going to kick in soon. And I kept saying, like, why isn't it working? Why isn't it working? They got the peanut ball and kind of propped me in a certain position for that. At first, the medical team wasn't going to do a vaginal exam then, but because I was just writhing in pain and having a really hard time, they ended up doing the vaginal exam. Surprisingly to everyone, I was at 9 centimeters already, and the baby's head was quite low. So the doctor said, things are progressing very quickly, and that's part of the reason you are so uncomfortable right now. It was progressing so much quicker than anyone on the team had expected. And the other thing was, the baby had managed to flip himself over, so he was sunny side up is what it's called, or OP. So he was still head down but facing the wrong way. So that also probably contributed a lot to the pain that I was experiencing. They said they were just going to closely monitor me. They kept saying the epidural was going to kick in. It was not kicking in at all. I was not getting any relief. So finally the nurse assessed me with an ice pack to see kind of how numb I was at different points along my legs and lower abdomen. She said, yeah, like, we need to call the anesthesiologist back because you're not getting the pain relief you should be, and you still have feeling in areas you shouldn't. I think the anesthesiologist told me that the pain should go down to about like a 3-ish out of 10 during the contractions once the epidural kicked in, but mine was just not going below like a 5 or a 6. I was still really, really feeling the contractions. And from watching like different labor delivery vlogs on YouTube, like whenever I saw someone get an epidural, they seemed like a different person after. They were comfortable, they were able to sleep, and that was just not the case with me at all. So I had a feeling that just something wasn't working the way it was supposed to be working. So she called him back in, and then she had to go on her lunch break. It was around 12:30 at that point. We had been in the room for about 2 hours, I think. So she went on her lunch break, and a different nurse came in who was also so incredible. And then the anesthesiologist reassessed what they were giving me through the epidural, did the top up, which was perfect timing because about 5 minutes later, the medical team came in to check me and told me it was time to push. The baby's head was right there. And yeah, it was crazy. Like I thought that maybe once the epidural was finally figured out and I got the relief, that I'd be able to have a little nap and refresh myself for pushing, but no, it was time to push then. So we just had to do it. I think I lost track of the timeline a little bit, but we got to the hospital around 9:30 to 10 by the time we had driven there and everything. And then we got in the delivery room around 10, By the time they said it was time to push, it was like a little after 1. So it all just progressed really, really quickly. Just about at that point was when that top-up actually started to provide relief. I think the initial epidural dose just wasn't enough for me. The top-up saved the day because the pushing went so smoothly. This was actually, honestly, like an enjoyable process for me. Once the epidural kicked in, the contractions, I still felt them, but they weren't anything like they were before. It was kind of just more like I could sense that I was tightening, but it wasn't that pain at all. They explained to me that when I started to feel a contraction come, that's when I should start pushing. They told me to bear down and like not exhale as I'm pushing, which I had like heard that that's often the recommendation at the hospital, and that's not actually the best thing for your body in terms of minimizing the risk of tearing and things like that. But at this point I just followed their instructions because that was the easiest thing to do in my mind. So I would tell the nurse when I was sensing a contraction coming, and they could usually see it on the monitor as well. They had a really hard time feeling on my stomach when I was contracting because I guess I had a fairly tight stomach in the first place, so it wasn't, they couldn't feel like they could with most people when my stomach was contracting. So they would look at the monitor and look to me, and then whenever I said I was feeling one coming, they would count me out to push, and they'd have me push for like 8 to 10 seconds bearing down, and then they would tell me to take a big inhale and then do it again. We did it like 3 or 4 times during each contraction, and then I'd get a break in between. The team was cheering for me. They kept telling me, you know, the head's right there, we can see the head, so much hair. Honestly, the pushing felt very easy to me. I had like a really, despite having the epidural, I had a really good sense of where I was pushing, how it should feel. The OB provided some tactile feedback with her hands and kind of said like, do you feel where my hand is? Try to push into that area. That was helpful. But I really feel like all the Kegel and pelvic floor training I did leading up to this delivery, and I pretty much did it every day, I really felt like that made the world of difference, because I understood my body so well and could really feel where to push and how to like ease off and ease into it. And I am just so grateful that I did all that training, because the pushing, like I said, was almost like an enjoyable experience for me. It wasn't painful. It felt really neat that I was like pushing a human out of me. Like it was honestly really, really cool. And everyone was so encouraging. The nurse that was there on my right side was super, super encouraging. And then my husband was on my left side, and he was watching everything and like thought it was really neat to be able to see it all. And then at one point they said like, do you want to reach down and touch his head, when his head was kind of part way out? So I was kind of like, sure. And that was just so cool. Like I can't even describe like how I was feeling at that point. It was so, so cool. There was one point where she told me to stop pushing, and it was really important for me to listen to her at that point. So of course I did. After about 8 to 10 minutes, the baby was out. I was holding him on my chest. Connor entered the world, so it was fairly quick. Of course I had to push out the placenta after, which I didn't feel at all. I mean, Connor was on my chest. That's all I was focused on. Oh, it was unbelievable. I honestly don't know how to put it into words, but it was just so, so special. It was the easiest part of the whole labor delivery process for me. Like the contractions, especially right after the epidural, when I was so anxious and worked up, and like that was all just so traumatic to me and so painful. But the actual pushing part, it was such a positive thing, and it was such a cool experience, and I'm so glad I got to enjoy that part of it. Oh, and he did end up kind of turning himself a little bit as he was coming out, so he wasn't completely sunny side up when he came out, which was good. But the OB said either way, like he can still be delivered that way. They weren't gonna turn to a C-section or anything like that. It was fine to deliver him that way. It can just be a little more like uncomfortable, but that all worked out from that perspective. And then they were inspecting me for any tears or anything while I was doing skin to skin with Connor right away. And I did not have any external tears at all, which was amazing. The OB said that like my pushes were just so controlled. They were so impressed. So that was, again, I really feel that all the pelvic floor training I did ahead of time, I can thank for that. And it was so worth it, because honestly, having no tears has made the recovery so easy for me. I've been up walking, lifting more than I should. It's been just such a quick, easy recovery, and I'm just so grateful for that. because I really already kind of feel like myself back in my body, which is really, really great. But yeah, so we got some quiet time with Connor. They weighed him 7 pounds 11 ounces, which was around what my husband had estimated, which was cool. I remember having this just weird protective instinct when they had to take him away to weigh him, and it was just weird because I didn't expect that. Like, I never thought I would be someone who would have like those motherly protective instincts, but it's just crazy what just naturally happens when you have this child in your arms. The other kind of minor complication was, like I mentioned before, it was important for me to get penicillin through the IV before I delivered him to protect him from the GBS bacteria. Because he came so much faster than anyone thought, they didn't get to give me all the full doses. I think I only got 2 doses. So they had to call the NICU team up to assess him, which again, like, I just felt so distant from him when he was over there being assessed from them. It was weird. Like, I guess after 9 months of having him in my body, like having him that far from me across the room was just such a strange thing. But anyway, they assessed him, and initially they said that we would have to stay in the hospital for 36 hours. They were gonna have to take him to a separate area to do this IV infusion for him to make sure he was protected. It was kind of a blur, but initially I was like, okay, well, it's not the worst thing to be in the hospital for extra time because we have all these supports here. I'm not completely against that. We brought lots of clothes and everything. But the thought of Connor going into a completely different area of the hospital and everything really scared me. But then the NICU team left for a bit. I think they said they were gonna have to check the whole process in this situation. When they came back, they ended up saying that because of like his blood work and the test results and everything, they weren't gonna do the IV infusion. They had to carefully monitor his blood work more than they usually would and monitor a few other things. But if everything looked okay, then they weren't going to do that infusion, and it was going to be okay for us to just leave the next day as planned. We got, I think it was only like an hour more in the labor and delivery room. They kind of cleaned me up. They wiped Connor down. They didn't bathe him. They don't encourage that anymore over the first few days at the hospital or anything, because it's good for the baby to be protected in his vernix and to have those familiar smells on him and everything. So my husband and I were definitely on board with that. We tried some breastfeeding right off the bat, which was important to get him used to the nipple. And then it was time to go to the postpartum floor, which was a whole other experience that maybe I'll talk a little bit more about in my next video. But the one thing I wanted to say, right when we got to the postpartum floor, the nurse made me go to the washroom right away, even though I didn't feel like I needed to or wanted to, because I was just comfortable in bed. But yeah, she made me go to the washroom right away, and I think I really appreciated that, because that was something that's kind of nerve-wracking after you've been through so much, and like I wasn't sure how I was going to feel. I was scared, but because she made me do it right away, I was like, okay, this is fine, no big deal at all. Again, thankfully I didn't have any tears or anything, so that obviously made it a lot easier. I guess my advice would be to get that first like bathroom run in as soon as you can after, and then you're comfortable, and then you're good, because that was helpful for me. So to summarize, overall, looking back, my experience was really good. The medical team was absolutely phenomenal. They were all so patient with me, so understanding. I felt like they were just genuinely excited for us, supported us through the whole thing, answered questions. They were there when we needed them for everything. It was a really, really great experience from that perspective. The contraction part was definitely the worst pain I've ever been in my life. Like, I was really on another level of pain through that, especially right after the epidural, and that where my blood pressure was going down and they were stressed about the baby, so I was worried about the baby, but was also in so much pain and wasn't sure why the epidural wasn't working. That was just a very traumatic period of time there. When they called all these different members of the team in, it just seemed like things were going in the wrong direction, but it all was fine in the end. But despite all of that, once we got to the pushing part, like I said, that was such a good experience for me. During that, I was like, I can do this again. That was amazing, 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 amazing experience. As for the induction, I went through like the different options that they said they might have to throw at me. In the end, all it took was the Foley catheter to trigger those contractions to start while I was at home that night. They didn't even need to give me any oxytocin when I got to the hospital, because my contractions were already so strong and close together. Interestingly, I learned that they always give you oxytocin after you deliver to kind of help your uterus go back to its normal tension and encourage it to continue contracting a little bit. So that was interesting. I didn't know that, but I didn't need any oxytocin as an induction method, and I didn't need any of the other induction methods. All I needed was the Foley catheter. Despite how uncomfortable that night was with the catheter, especially like being at home and just really just feeling unsure about like what to expect and what was happening to my body, despite all that, I would do that again if I needed to. When I was looking up information on the Foley catheter and different people's experiences with it going into my induction, a lot of the videos I watched and things I read were pretty negative. A lot of people just really didn't recommend it. I had to stop like watching things because I was like, oh my, like, is this a really bad idea? But for me, it ended up being the best thing. It got everything started, and yeah, it was one really bad night at home that night, but labor is not going to be an easy thing. So I would do it again if I had to, if my body didn't kickstart the process again like it didn't this time. One thing looking back that I realized is that I completely forgot to ask for the popsicles that I was so excited to have during the labor process. That just shows how distracted I was through the whole thing. Oh well. And it's funny how you really do have to go with the flow and just completely let go of any expectations you have. Really just don't have any expectations, because things are not going to go how you plan them. There's too many factors. But yeah, because I had pictured myself, walking around having a very active labor, and right from the moment I got into the labor delivery room, I was in the bed the entire time. When the nurse first put the monitors on me, she asked if I wanted the portable ones, and a lot of people had recommended that to me if you wanted to be able to move around, and usually labor is a much longer process, especially with your first. So I said yes, I would prefer those. So she initially put just the regular ones on, but then switched them to portable. And I feel kind of bad for making her do that, because there was no way that I was doing any moving around during that labor process. That I could barely roll in bed. It's just funny when you look back at those things. They had like the balls and the squat bar and all those things around in the room, and I thought I'd be someone like trying all those different positions and doing all that, but nope, I was just in bed moaning or howling. I'm not really sure what the word would be to describe it, but anyway, yeah, that was me the whole time. So yeah, overall, great experience. So grateful for the medical team, so grateful to my husband. And now we have this absolutely beautiful baby boy, Connor. We love him so much. I tell him a million times a day. The whole thing is just so incredible to look back on. And I'm honestly so happy, 100% without a doubt. All the challenges throughout pregnancy, the whole induction labor delivery process, it was all worth it for this little man, because he is my whole world now, along with my husband, of course. And I just love them both so much, and we're all so happy and so grateful right now. I'm sure I've missed some of the details I wanted to capture in this little recap, but hopefully that gave you an overall picture of my experience. Hopefully you learned something. If you have any questions at all, please shoot me a message or put them in the comments, because I would be happy to answer them. And then maybe in a future video I'll talk about kind of the experience we had in the postpartum floor, where we were for that night in the hospital, and the first few days transitioning at home, things that worked, things that didn't, because it definitely is just a massive transitional phase. But that's it for now. Bye.
Thanks for listening to my experience, everyone. I feel beyond lucky to have this beautiful baby boy and a birth story to share with you all, and I really hope you enjoyed listening to it. Of course, let me know if you have any questions. I have to go feed Connor now, so I'm going to share the winner of the April quote challenge next week and share the quotes that different people who did the challenge have shared with me. Also, if you haven't sent me your favorite quote yet, feel free to send it along this week and I'll include it too. For our final deep breath today, try putting one hand on your chest and one hand on your stomach. And then as you inhale, feel the hand on your stomach rise, followed by the hand on your chest. And then as you exhale, feel the hand on your chest fall, followed by the hand on your stomach. This is called belly breathing, and I've found it to be a very effective strategy at bringing myself back to the present moment and focusing on my breath lately. So all together, on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, in, and out. Good job. Until next week.